Amy Slaton's unraveling didn't suddenly begin with the premiere of Season 8 of 1,000 Pound Sisters. Episode 1 simply marked the moment when everything she had been avoiding for years finally rose to the surface, impossible to soften with jokes, editing tricks, or carefully chosen soundbites. According to multiple people close to production and the Slaton family, the season opener was deliberately shaped to expose what insiders describe as the most emotionally unstable period Amy has experienced since the show first aired. And even then, viewers were only shown a controlled glimpse of what had already been brewing behind the scenes for months. When filming resumed, producers anticipated tension. They expected unresolved feelings, awkward reunions, maybe a few sharp arguments. What they didn't expect was the level of emotional withdrawal Amy displayed almost immediately. From the earliest scenes, there was a noticeable shift in her presence. In past seasons, even during her lowest moments, Amy balanced vulnerability with humor or at least some self-awareness. This time, that balance was gone. Insiders say she arrived to filming guarded, defensive, and already emotionally checked out from her siblings. Any suggestion of accountability was met with resistance, and any concern felt, to Amy, like an attack. Her distance from the family wasn't impulsive or sudden. It had been building quietly, layered over months of resentment following last season's explosive confrontation with Tammy. While many viewers assumed that fight had cooled down during the off-season, those close to the situation describe it as a permanent fracture. Amy, they say, never truly forgave Tammy for what was said during that argument. More significantly, she never forgave the rest of the family for failing to side with her without hesitation. To Amy, neutrality felt like betrayal. Publicly, Amy framed her separation as a quest for peace and independence. Privately, insiders say it was driven by anger, embarrassment, and a deep desire to avoid further scrutiny. Reconciliation wasn't her goal. She wanted distance without consequences, space without questions, and validation without challenge. Anyone who disrupted that vision risked being pushed out. Her upcoming wedding, repeatedly referenced in the premiere, became the clearest symbol of this shift. What should have been a joyful family milestone reportedly turned into a barrier Amy used to control access to her life. Multiple sources claim she leveraged the wedding plans as subtle emotional currency, making it clear that criticism or concern could result in exclusion. The message wasn't always spoken outright, but it was understood. Support meant silence. Honesty meant distance. This dynamic created an atmosphere where family members felt forced to choose between walking on eggshells or losing their place in Amy's life altogether. Genuine concern was often misinterpreted as sabotage, while quiet compliance was rewarded. Over time, that imbalance eroded trust and communication on all sides. In stark contrast, Tammy Slaton's transformation this season has surprised not only viewers, but the production team itself. Once viewed as the most volatile and resistant member of the family, Tammy now appears grounded, focused, and emotionally present. Insiders describe her relationship with her girlfriend Andrea as stabilizing rather than chaotic, offering consistency and encouragement instead of distraction. Tammy's decision to seek her first job wasn't manufactured for television. Sources confirm it was her own initiative, driven by a need to reclaim control after years of dependency. This reversal has fundamentally altered the family dynamic. Tammy, once the person everyone worried about, has become the responsible sibling. Meanwhile, Amy, previously seen as the success story, now appears increasingly unpredictable. According to those present during filming, Tammy made several quiet attempts to approach Amy privately and de-escalate tensions. Each time, she was shut down. One insider recalled an off-camera moment where Tammy calmly said she didn't want to fight anymore. Amy reportedly walked away without responding. That silence, sources say, set the emotional tone for the rest of the season. Chris Slaton, long considered the emotional anchor of the family, is shown struggling under pressures that extend far beyond what viewers initially see. His wife Brittany's fight to quit soda and qualify for weight loss surgery has reportedly put their household under immense strain. Off-camera, insiders describe frequent arguments fueled by frustration, stress, and setbacks. Chris, caught between supporting his wife and managing escalating family conflict, is said to be exhausted and emotionally drained. The optimistic motivator fans are used to seeing is still there, but it's buried beneath fatigue and quiet worry. Amanda's health concerns, briefly touched on in the premiere, carry far more weight behind the scenes. According to sources close to the family, her medical issues have sparked serious conversations about mortality, responsibility, and the limits of denial. Amanda's openness isn't just vulnerability. It's a warning. She represents the reality that progress isn't guaranteed and time isn't unlimited. For some family members, that honesty has been grounding. For Amy, insiders say, it feels threatening. Misty's birthday celebration, which producers hoped would offer a moment of unity, instead exposed just how fractured the family has become. On the surface, the gathering appeared light and celebratory. Behind the scenes, it was tense and carefully managed. Amy was physically present, but emotionally distant. Family members reportedly avoided sensitive topics entirely to prevent another blow-up. The awkward pauses viewers noticed weren't random. They were moments where real conversations were intentionally shut down to keep the peace. What has alarmed those closest to Amy most isn't just her isolation, but her growing habit of deflection. Any suggestion that she might be struggling is reframed as others refusing to support her happiness. Insiders say this mindset has made it nearly impossible to reach her. Conversations about emotional health, parenting stress, or long-term stability are often shut down before they can begin. One source described it as watching someone build walls while insisting they're finally free. Even producers are reportedly concerned about where Amy's storyline is headed. Season 8 marks a shift in tone for the series. According to one insider, it's no longer about weight loss. It's about consequences. About what happens when one person refuses to grow while everyone else is changing around them. Episode 1 frames Amy not as a victim of circumstance, but as someone actively choosing isolation over healing. As the season unfolds, sources warn that Amy's decisions will have lasting effects, not only on her relationships, but on her future within the family itself. The premiere isn't the climax. It's the opening chapter of what insiders describe as the most emotionally difficult season the Slaton family has ever filmed. And if episode 1 is any indication, Amy Slaton's downfall isn't a dramatic collapse. It's a slow, visible drift away from the very people who once fought hardest to save her. As filming for season 8 continued beyond the premiere, the emotional cracks exposed in the first episode didn't begin to heal. They widened. According to multiple sources close to production, what initially appeared to be a rough adjustment period for Amy Slaton quickly revealed itself as a sustained pattern of withdrawal that left both her family and the network deeply concerned. The optimism that once surrounded Amy as the show's greatest success story quietly faded, replaced by private fears that her personal life was slipping into something far more unstable than what cameras could comfortably capture. Insiders say Amy's detachment from her siblings was mirrored by a noticeable change in how she interacted with the production crew. In earlier seasons, Amy was open, expressive, and often eager to explain her side of things, even when she was struggling. This season, that openness is largely gone. She is described as guarded and reactive, often bristling at questions she perceives as judgmental. Several people involved in filming have described an atmosphere where conversations feel pre-controlled, as if Amy has already decided what version of events she's willing to allow on camera. Any attempt to dig deeper is reportedly met with shutdowns or emotional walls. This has placed producers in a difficult position. They are tasked with documenting reality, but they are also navigating a fragile emotional environment where pushing too hard risks escalation. Behind the scenes, insiders say there have been tense moments where filming had to pause simply because Amy disengaged entirely. What viewers see as clipped answers or distant behavior is, according to sources, the toned-down version of a much heavier reality. At the core of Amy's stance is her insistence that she is finally in control of her life. She frequently frames her separation from the family as proof of independence and self-growth. But privately, several relatives believe this narrative is masking emotional exhaustion and avoidance rather than genuine healing. One insider described it as Amy deciding that anyone who challenges her choices no longer belongs in her future. That belief has left almost no room for honest dialogue, because honesty itself is seen as disloyalty. Tammy Slaton's continued evolution only sharpens this contrast. As Tammy becomes more consistent, accountable, and forward-looking, Amy's resistance to introspection becomes harder to ignore. Insiders revealed that when Tammy began seriously pursuing employment, Amy reacted with skepticism rather than support, allegedly dismissing the effort as unnecessary pressure. That response reportedly cut deeply, especially for Tammy, who has spent years fighting to redefine herself beyond the role of the family's problem. For Tammy, Season 8 represents survival and reinvention. For Amy, it increasingly appears to represent control and defiance. Tammy's relationship with Andrea has become a quiet but powerful point of comparison. Sources say Andrea has brought structure, encouragement, and emotional balance into Tammy's life. Instead of chaos, Tammy's scenes now reflect planning, responsibility, and long-term thinking. That stability has led some family members to privately admit that Tammy, once considered the most vulnerable, may now be the most emotionally grounded of them all. Chris Slaton's burden grows heavier as the season progresses. While he continues to present himself as supportive on camera, insiders say his private frustration is mounting. His efforts to mediate conversations are often met with defensiveness, and his patience is being tested as he juggles family turmoil alongside his own household stress. Brittany's struggle to meet the strict requirements for weight loss surgery has intensified, with repeated setbacks triggering cycles of guilt, anger, and disappointment. Those close to Chris say he feels trapped between responsibility and helplessness. He understands the seriousness of Brittany's health journey and wants to be supportive, but the emotional toll of watching Amy pull away while trying to hold everything together has left him visibly worn down. Sources claim Chris has begun questioning whether his role as the family stabilizer is even sustainable anymore, especially when his efforts are increasingly met with resistance rather than appreciation. Amanda's storyline, initially treated as a secondary thread, becomes increasingly significant as filming continues. Insiders indicate that her health concerns have sparked deeper, more uncomfortable conversations among the siblings. Amanda's willingness to confront reality head-on stands in stark contrast to Amy's tendency to retreat from it. This difference in coping styles has reportedly led to tension, with Amy viewing Amanda's honesty as negativity rather than concern. Misty, often the quiet observer within the family, has become more vocal as the emotional strain escalates. Sources say she has expressed disappointment that gatherings meant for connection now feel strained and performative. What should be moments of celebration are overshadowed by caution and unspoken rules. Off-camera, Misty is described as increasingly worried that the family's fractures may soon become permanent if nothing changes. What worries those closest to Amy most is not just her isolation, but her apparent lack of self-reflection. Insiders say she rarely acknowledges her role in escalating conflicts. Instead, situations are reframed as everyone else turning against her. This mindset has created an echo chamber where only affirming voices are allowed close. Friends and relatives who raise concerns risk being shut out entirely, reinforcing the cycle of distance Amy insists is freedom. From a production standpoint, Season 8 marks a turning point for the series. Network insiders say executives are closely watching audience reactions, particularly as sympathy begins to shift toward other family members. While the show has always been built on raw emotion, there is growing unease about documenting decline without visible paths toward support or intervention. One source summed it up bluntly: there's a difference between showing struggle and watching someone quietly spiral. Despite these concerns, filming continues, capturing moments insiders describe as some of the most uncomfortable in the show's history. Conversations trail off without resolution. Family gatherings feel tense instead of chaotic. Laughter, once a defining feature, is replaced by long silences. And through it all, Amy maintains that she is happier than she has ever been, a claim that contrasts sharply with the mood surrounding her. As the season moves forward, unresolved issues refuse to stay buried. Amy's wedding plans, Tammy's independence, Brittany's hopes for surgery, and Amanda's health realities begin to converge, pushing the family toward moments of reckoning. Avoidance, once Amy's shield, becomes harder to maintain as the consequences of distance become impossible to ignore. What emerges from this middle stretch of the season is a sobering realization. Amy Slaton's decline isn't driven by one explosive event, but by a series of small refusals. Refusals to listen. Refusals to reflect. Refusals to reconnect. And with each refusal, the gap between Amy and the people who once formed her emotional foundation grows wider, quieter, and more difficult to cross. By the time Season 8 moves into its later episodes, the central question surrounding Amy Slaton is no longer whether she is struggling. That much has become undeniable. The real question, according to multiple insiders close to production, is whether anyone can still reach her before the damage hardens into something permanent. What unfolds in the final stretch of the season is not a dramatic explosion or a single defining confrontation, but a slow, unsettling emotional crisis marked by silence, distance, and missed chances for reconciliation. Sources describe this phase of filming as the point where dysfunction becomes normalized. Amy's insistence on independence gradually shifts into something far more troubling. Emotional isolation disguised as empowerment. Conversations with family members grow shorter and more transactional. Check-ins become logistics. Schedules replace connection. Insiders say Amy begins treating relationships like obligations to be managed rather than bonds to be nurtured, quietly severing emotional ties while insisting she never needed them in the first place. Throughout this period, Amy continues to insist that she is prioritizing her happiness. But those around her increasingly worry that she has confused avoidance with healing. Instead of working through discomfort, she sidesteps it. Instead of engaging with concern, she reframes it as judgment. Over time, this pattern leaves her surrounded by silence rather than support, a silence she interprets as peace. Her wedding, once framed as a hopeful new beginning, becomes one of the clearest examples of this emotional shift. Insiders say the event evolves into a pressure point rather than a celebration. Family members reportedly feel unsure of their place, uncertain whether their involvement is genuinely wanted or merely tolerated. What should have been a unifying milestone instead highlights how conditional Amy's openness has become. Participation feels contingent on agreement. Presence feels earned, not welcomed. Tammy Slaton's continued growth becomes an unspoken counterpoint to Amy's trajectory. By embracing responsibility, employment, and emotional accountability, Tammy inadvertently exposes the areas where Amy's progress has stalled. Sources say Tammy grows more cautious around her sister, not out of bitterness, but self-protection. Having fought relentlessly to escape her own destructive patterns, Tammy is unwilling to be pulled back into chaos, even when that chaos comes from family. This role reversal is one of the most striking developments of the season. Where Amy once served as the motivator and example, she now appears defensive and closed off. Meanwhile, Tammy demonstrates empathy, restraint, and a willingness to reflect that Amy does not return. For longtime viewers, the shift is jarring. For the family, it is emotionally complex, blending pride with grief over what feels like a loss of balance. Chris Slaton reaches a visible breaking point as the season draws toward its conclusion. Insiders say his efforts to mediate become increasingly ineffective, and his exhaustion is no longer easy to hide. Balancing Brittany's ongoing health struggles with the emotional fragmentation of the family leaves him questioning how much responsibility one person can realistically carry. Several sources describe Chris as emotionally overloaded, holding everyone else together while quietly unraveling himself. Brittany's journey toward qualifying for weight loss surgery continues to test their marriage. Setbacks trigger cycles of guilt and blame, forcing difficult conversations about consistency, support, and limits. While the show presents determination, those close to the couple say the stress has reshaped their dynamic. Chris, once relentlessly optimistic, begins to show a more sober realism. Encouragement alone is no longer enough. Change requires sustained effort, and not everyone is willing or able to maintain it. Amanda's health concerns take on greater emotional weight as the season nears its end. Her transparency forces the family to confront uncomfortable truths about time, accountability, and the consequences of delay. Insiders say Amanda's willingness to speak plainly has made her both a source of strength and a target of resentment. For Amy, these conversations reportedly feel threatening as they challenge her belief that disengagement is a viable long-term strategy. Misty, often overlooked in earlier seasons, emerges as a quiet emotional compass in the final episodes. Sources describe her as deeply unsettled by the erosion of genuine connection within the family. She voices concern that the siblings are drifting toward permanent estrangement, a fear that lingers heavily as the season closes. Her reflections lack drama, but they carry weight. Pain does not disappear simply because people stop talking about it. From a network perspective, Season 8 represents a moment of reckoning. Insiders suggest executives are acutely aware that the series has entered darker territory. While authenticity remains central, there is growing unease about documenting emotional decline without clear signs of intervention or resolution. One production source described the shift bluntly. The show is no longer just about transformation. It is about consequences. This change is reflected in how Amy is portrayed in the latter episodes. The editing grows quieter and more observational. Scenes linger on pauses, guarded responses, and the space between family members. The humor that once defined Amy's presence is largely absent, replaced by tension and emotional distance. The effect is subtle but powerful. Something essential is slipping away and no one knows how to stop it. What defines the final moments of this unfolding story is the lack of closure. There is no dramatic collapse, no sudden realization, no guaranteed redemption. Instead, there is uncertainty. Insiders describe an ending that feels unfinished, mirroring Amy's own emotional state. The family stands at a crossroads, aware that continued avoidance may lead to permanent loss. Tammy Slaton's downfall in Season 8 is not constructed around shock value or spectacle. It is a cautionary portrait of what happens when growth stalls, accountability is rejected, and independence is pursued at the cost of connection. The tragedy is not that Amy is struggling. It is that she appears unwilling to acknowledge it, even as those around her confront their own realities and attempt to move forward. As the season closes, one truth becomes unavoidable. 1,000-Pound Sisters is no longer just a story about weight loss. It is a story about emotional survival, fractured bonds, and the quiet danger of mistaking distance for strength. For Amy Slaton, the most critical chapter of her journey may still lie ahead, depending on whether she chooses to turn back toward the family she is steadily leaving behind, or continues down a path where silence replaces support and independence comes at the highest possible cost.